My name is Kwankeaw. I am firm that I have recorded the audio book with my own voice and that this work is my own. I accept responsibility for my role in ensuring that integrity of the work submitted by the group in which I participated.
The apartment was small, but it was quiet, and that was all Mira wanted. After years of living in crowded places filled with contrast noise, traffic, conversations, music through thin walls, she has finally found a space that felt still. It was located on the top floor of another building at the end of a narrow street. The stairs were worn. The paint on the walls slightly faded, and the elevator rarely worked. But when she stepped inside the apartment for the first time, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Silence, not complete silence, but the cry that allowed her to hear her want too clearly. The cry that made every small sound meaningful rather than overwhelming. She moved in the following week. The first few days were actually what she had hoped for. In the mornings, sunlight entered through the largest window in the living room, casting soft shadows on the wooded floor. In the evenings, the street below remained calm, with only occasional footsteps passing by. At night, the building settled into a deep quiet that wrapped around her like a blanket. Mira began to build a routine. She walked during the day, often at a small drink near the window, and spent her evenings reading or writing in a notebook. She rarely turned on a music. She preferred that neutral sounds of the space, the faint movement of air, the distant hum of the city far below. But after about a week, she noticed something unusual. At first, it was very noticeable. A sound, soft, irregular and distant. It seemed to come from above her ceiling. Mila paused, listening carefully. The sound was not loud enough to be disturbing, but it was clear enough to be recognized. It was not the cry of noise that came from place or electrical systems. It had a pattern, though not consistent one, sounded like movement. Footsteps. She found it slightly. That did not make sense. She lived on the top floor. There was nothing above her. At first, she dismissed it as her imagination. All buildings make strange sounds, especially at night. Woods appended and contracted, pipes shifted and echoed carried in unexpected ways. Still the sound continued. Each night, at almost the same time, she heard it again. Soft steps. Low, measured, as if someone were walking carefully across the space above her. Mira tried to ignore it, but the more she listened, the more certain she became that it was not random noise. It was deliberate. One evening, unable to ignore it any longer, she decided to ask the building manager. "This is a sound coming from above my apartment," she says. "It sounds like someone walking." The manager looked at her with mild confusion. "That is not possible," he replied. "There is nothing above you until just the roof." Mila nodded slowly. "That is what I thought," she said. "All buildings make noise," the manager added. "It's normal." Mila thanked him and returned to her apartment. Thought these expansions did little to ease her curiosity. That night, the sound came again. This time, she stood in the center of the room, looking up at the ceiling, as the footsteps moved slowly from one side to the other. She felt a mixture of unease and curiosity. Instead of ignoring it, she decided to observe it. The footsteps were not random. They followed a pattern. Though it was subtle, there was a pause between each step, as if whoever or whatever was moving above her was careful, almost thoughtful. The next evening, when the sound began, Mira did something different. She spoke. "Hello," she said softly, her voice barely rising above the quiet of the room. The footsteps stopped. Immediately, the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Mila held her brain listening. Nothing. After a long moment, she let out a quiet sigh. "It's just a building," she whispered to herself. But as she turned away, the footsteps resumed, slow this time, more conscious. Over the next few days, Mila found herself thinking about the sound more often than she expected. It did not find her exactly, but it unsettled her in a way she could not easily explain. It felt international, as if something was aware of her. One evening, she decided to try something unusual. When the footsteps began, she walked to the center of the room and tapped lightly on the ceiling with the handle of wooden spoon. 3 taps. She waited. A few seconds passed. Then from above, she heard it. The soft footsteps. Mila's heart began to beat faster. She tapped again. 2 taps that time. 2 taps that time. There was a pause. Then 2 footsteps. The pattern was clear. Something or someone was responding. Mila sat down slowly, trying to steady her thought. "This don't make sense," she said quietly. But the evidence was undeniable. The following nights became a strange kind of routine. Mila would wait for the footsteps, then respond with gentle taps, creating a simple form of communication. The responses were always careful, never rushed, as if the presence above her was learning that rhythm just as she was. Despite the strangeness of the situation, Mila did not feel fear. Instead, she felt something unexpected. Comfort. The apartment was no longer completely empty. One night, after several days of his silent exchange, Mila spoke again. "Who are you?" she asked. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, there was no response. Then, slowly, a single step. A pause. Another step. It was not a clear answer, but it felt like an acknowledgement. Mila smiled slightly. "I don't know how to understand that," she said softly. She hesitated, then added, "But I'm here." The following evening, something changed. The footsteps began clearer than unsure. Mila was sitting at her desk when he heard them. She stood up, expecting the familiar pattern. But this time, the movement above her was different, faster, less careful. She stopped. She stepped into the center of the room. "Are you okay?" she asked instinctively. The footsteps stopped. Then, suddenly, there was a loud sound above her, a sharp, heavy shift, followed by silence. Mila felt a surge of concern. Without thinking, she grabbed her keys and hurried out of the apartment. She climbed the narrow staircase that led through the roof access door. It was very huge, and she had never gone up there before. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open, closed it and rushed toward her as she stepped on through the roof. For a moment, she saw nothing unusual. The rooftop was empty, quiet, and still under the dim glow of the city rise. Then she noticed something near the fair edge, closed slightly, as if listening. Mila approached slowly. It was a young person, perhaps a teenager, wrapped in a thin jacket, lying on the crunchy surface. Their eyes were closed, and their breathing was shallow. Mira knelt beside them. "Hey," she said gently. "Can you hear me?" The person stirred slightly but did not fully wake. Mila weakly called for help, her voice steady despite the sudden situation. Later, as she sat beside the ambulance, watching as the young person was carefully lifted onto a stretcher, she began to understand. The footsteps, the pauses, the responses, they had not been a mystery. They had been a person who had been there all along, moving quietly, unseen, fighting upon the noise of the world. The next evening, when Mira returned to her apartment, the silence felt different again. It was still quiet, but now it held meaning. She stood in the center of the room and looked up at the ceiling. For a moment, she considered tapping again, but she didn't. Instead, she plainly said, "I hope you're okay." The room remained silent, yet for the first time, the silence did not feel empty. It felt full of something she had not expected to find when she first moved in: connections,